Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending the session today, and a huge thanks to the NDSA DigiPress Organizing Committee for putting together such a great conference this year. My name is Graf, and I'm a digital preservation librarian at Yale Library. Today, I'll be talking through a project that I'm currently working on, which is creating an inventory of my unit's data sources. This work is aimed at increasing trust and resilience, both for my team and for the stakeholders we support. So a quick outline of today, I'll cover some context for the project, challenges around defining and selecting which data sources to include, a quick overview of my inventory template, and then finally talk through some lessons learned and next steps. So a little background on my role in UNIT. I am part of the digital preservation team at Yale Library, where we help manage the library's digital preservation system and collaborate with units across the institution to preserve the digital content. Our system is a large one, over 130 million files and about 1.3 petabytes of data. We're also integrated with Tableau for reporting and analytics. So it's in this context that I kind of started working on this project. So why did we do this? Initially, my goal was just to better organize and document our existing Tableau reports. But as I started, I realized there was a lot more data that was under the surface that really needed systematic documentation. So the scope of the inventory expanded from there. The project became to better understand our data sources and then to use that knowledge to hopefully support planning and onboarding for new staff, work to identify gaps and opportunities to make better use of our data sources, and reduce the risk of invisible data being lost. So at first glance, this seems straightforward. The NDSA levels, for example, recommend creating an inventory. That's level 1. But actually taking the time to do this work can be challenging given all the other commitments that we're all juggling. For me, it was helpful to really frame this as an act of care. So it's care for ourselves as the current stewards, and then also for future stewards and stakeholders. And this type of work really does help us become more resilient in the face of change. So that's really the why. So now talking about the what do we actually need to inventory? Before we dive in, I want you to consider how many data sources do you think your team interacts with daily? Most of us probably have more than we realize, and many are probably not documented. So for my unit, we were creating, updating, or referencing a variety of sources in our daily workflows or to share with stakeholders, but our sources were scattered and not documented centrally. This can make onboarding new staff harder and can leave a lot of duplicative or obsolete sources kind of floating around. Also, some sources aren't obvious. So a collaborative meeting minutes document that captures decisions, that's a data source. A thread in a ticketing system that resolved a technical issue that we refer back to over time to figure out what we did, that's a data source. Some sources aren't owned by us, but are regularly referenced. And then some are more ephemeral than others. Another challenge was that many sources also have layers. So a Tableau dashboard can be a data source in and of itself if we're using it for, say, putting together a quarterly departmental report. But that Tableau report itself can depend on other data sources, such as our system database. Many hidden dependencies can start to come to light once you actually start mapping all these different data sources out. And no definition of data source will be perfect, but without an idea of one, it's hard to know where to even start to document. So how do we start to bring order to the chaos? So thinking more broadly about data sources, what might they be? For this project, I use the term broadly. Basically, anything our team interacted with, referenced, or relied on in our work. It could be something that we create and actively maintain, or something that we simply use. So what it can include things like structured or unstructured information, systems or documentation, communications or collaborative resources, program or activity statistics. And then also helpfully, how are we using these things? So for us, we were using a lot in reference, also in our workflows, also in reporting and storytelling, training, and then quite frequently for decision making. And then who uses them? It could be things that our unit used, or users of the digital preservation system and services that we provide, and then our stakeholders more broadly. This expansive definition helped me avoid getting stuck debating whether something qualified or not. It really allowed me to just jump in there and start documenting. So with this framework, I started grouping sources into categories. These are very broad categories. I'm sure there could have been others that I could have included, but it was a helpful starting place for me. So the first category was the systems and infrastructure. So this would include things like our digital preservation system database. And then we had support and communication channels. So things like our ticketing systems, collaborative workspaces, those kind of things. Then documentation and knowledge resources that might exist on GitHub, SharePoint, or training resources that we provide to our the units that we work with. Program and activity data, things like born digital accessioning stats, training attendance. And then workflow and project tracking, so things like project Kanban boards, and then also statistics that come out of our bulk packaging and ingest work that we do. So with the categories created, I created an inventory template then as an Excel workbook that allowed me to do easy data entry and updates. It was important for me to use a flexible iterative process for this. As I dug into the data, I knew I would uncover additional sources and types of information that I would need to document. So flexibility was a key. My template captures both structured and unstructured sources, as well as ownership, usage, lifecycle information, and then also allowed me to note gaps or opportunities for improvement. So the actual Excel workbook then had separate tabs for instructions for how to use a template, a detailed list of fields with descriptions for what the fields were, then a blank inventory template that I could then fill out. And then I allowed space for appendices. For example, I started keeping a running list of data that I knew we weren't currently collecting, but might want to in the future. So keeping everything in a single place makes maintenance much easier over time. So this chart shows the fields that I included in the inventory. I don't have time to go into all of them today, but you're welcome to review the slide in more detail later. So here again, I grouped into 5 categories. There could have been other categories I may wanted to include, but this really did capture most of the information I was interested in documenting, at least to start. And although it's not an exact mapping, the NDSA levels were a helpful lens for adding context to these categories. So I divided fields into kind of the core fields, which were the most critical to document immediately, and then also extended or kind of supplemental fields, which might have been harder for me to track down, but I could add them in over time as I found them out. This really helped keep the inventory manageable and iterative for me. So the first category was identity and context. So basically, what is this data source? Where does it come from? Why are we collecting it? Loosely aligned with NDSA levels, this is really that fundamental work of knowing your content and starting to create some basic metadata about it. Then the second category is stewardship and responsibility. Who owns the data? Who manages it? Who can access it? This aligns with NDSA levels on protecting and controlling your data. Then looking at structure and logistics, this is really starting to get into the nuts and bolts of the actual data sources. So what formats is it in? Where is it located? How is it collected? What technology is used to collect or to access it? This aligns with NDSA levels on knowing and protecting your content and also the functional area of storage. Then looking at lifecycle and maintenance, how's the source stewarded over time? This aligns with the NDSA levels on protection and monitoring your data. And then evaluation of future plans. How are we using this data source? What's working? What could be improved? What else might we need to know? This is really where it starts to move into those NDSA levels of really monitoring and sustaining over time. So even small insights from this step could help me see new ways to be able to leverage data for reporting and storytelling. So if you take a moment to think about your own environment, do these categories cover most of your data source, or is there something else that is missing for your particular context? But I think it's really helpful to kind of think about these in larger categories and then expand them out from there. So now, and a quick example of how I actually use the template for one particular data source, which is our SharePoint site for our user-facing documentation and training resources. So here for the identity and context, my unit is the primary source for this data source. We're the ones that are creating the SharePoint site. And the purpose of it is used mostly for training and for reference. And then looking at stewardship and responsibility, then our unit owns a site. Then I'm responsible for updating it. And the key stakeholders for us then are mostly internal staff who are working with our digital preservation system or other systems that are integrated with ours. Here I did want to note there are some data sensitivity privacy concerns. Some content in this is proprietary vendor content, so we may not be able to share things publicly. So that was important to note. And then permissions that are write only for our unit staff or read write for our unit, and then read only for others. So that way things don't accidentally get modified. So then moving into structure and logistics, the formats for this varied a lot of MP4s, PDFs, as it's a lot of training materials. And then it's stored in our institution managed SharePoint. Collection frequency, typically when we're pulling data out of this, it's usually manual and on an as needed basis. And then for lifecycle and maintenance, then content is generally retained indefinitely. Updates will happen manually as needed or along with system upgrades that happen. For backups, I wasn't actually sure at the time how the overall SharePoint for the institution was backed up, but I did go ahead and back up training resources on my OneDrive. So that's a piece that might require a little bit of research and talking with people. And then our ITS provides some documentation for how to use it. And then a dependency then for us is that SharePoint is continued to be maintained by our ITS department. That's an important dependency for this source. So then starting to look at evaluation and future use. The site is used for reference with some web traffic stats. Access is frequent, but we do have limited control over certain changes that we can make since it is managed centrally, the SharePoint site as a whole. And then archiving these pages out or sharing externally can be challenging. So then opportunities then include a new SharePoint reporting features and dashboards that might be able to allow me to combine multiple uses measures to demonstrate impact of our outreach efforts. And then notes it was still a fairly new site, not widely released to users yet. So hopefully this example shows how flexible that inventory process can be, and it really encourages you to start thinking about future use more broadly. So with our couple minutes that I have left, I want to go through some lessons learned. For me, it was a little tricky at first to kind of narrow down what data sources to include and what exactly a data source is, especially when you look at sources that are layered and comprised of other sources. But an important thing I learned is that perfection is not the goal. Even if you have a first iteration of a project, that can help surface really helpful information. And then the work of documentation itself can really build trust and encourage collaboration. And then finally, it's important to build in some regular reviews so that you can keep your inventory current and actionable. And here, having this inventory template is really helpful because I can take what I had filled in, and if I want to update it on a yearly basis, for example, I can take what I had and update it, but also kind of keep a snapshot by year of what our data sources looked like. So my next steps for the project then are to continue refining the inventory and then encourage staff to contribute knowledge of additional sources because I'm sure others in my unit will know of sources I didn't even think about. And then to continue to use the gaps and opportunities that were identified to both guide our future data collection process and also use it for additional reporting and storytelling. So at its core, this process is really about care, making knowledge visible, reducing the risk of institutional memory loss, and really working to support ourselves and our future selves through periods of change or uncertainty. So I do keep coming back to this idea of care. It's a simple principle, but it's been surprisingly useful for when you're doing projects like this and making decisions. So finally, thank you so much. My contact information is on the screen if anyone would like to reach out later, and I will be happy to answer questions during the Q&A session. Thank you so much.